Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our last session for FY 2024 for the South Carolina Arts Network scan. Tonight, we will be listening to Scott Artley, who will be talking about Radically Together. It's a cultural asset for people with disabilities. Scott is a national recognized expert in arts and cultural accessibility. He has over 15 years of leadership experience in the arts with a special focus on community-driven initiatives and social justice, emerging from his own experience as a queer disabled artist. In this talk, we will listen together through the lens of his particularly strange arts leadership career. Scott will introduce the language and concepts of disability accessibility as a set of learnable skills and some examples of artists and organizations who've made their work inviting people of all abilities. Scott will highlight the mindsets and the deep skills necessary to bring more people into your circles and answer your questions about how to best meet the needs and disabled community members. As we listen to this talk, if you have any questions, please utilize please utilize the chat. We also want to make sure that we're creating a safe and brave space. So if there are any questions that are specific to your organization, we will pause the recording at the end so that you can ask Scott those questions directly. Scott, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I want to also thank Gina Reworks Targi, who wasn't able to make this today. She was the original person invited to participate, and so graciously handed it over to me when she wasn't able to do it. So I'm really glad to be here. Thank you, Gina, and thank you all for being here today. So I am an odd fellow. I'll just put that out there. Is that in my notes? Of course not, because this is how I run my events. So I used to MC cabarets, and that means that I am a big ham. So you're going to be kind of enjoying that, hopefully, along the way. If you're not enjoying it thus far, hopefully stick around. You're going to. I like to make a topic that could seem really dry, really fun. If you hate it already, well, it was so nice. Thanks for stopping by. And maybe check out the recording where you can make me go really fast and be over with it. Anyway, all right. So my talk today is called Radically Together. And I'm so glad to be doing this as an adapted version of some of the other talks that I've done. I'm just such a big nerd about arts and accessibility and creating better and more accessible space for people with disabilities to participate in arts and cultural environments. So this is already wrong. My agenda, I'm just really kicking it off, aren't I? The agenda here is wrong, but we're basically going to be talking a little bit about me and like my background, how I got into this work, and sort of a philosophy of how to approach arts and accessibility work that I hope will provide some context around how I got here and think about how you might resonate with some of it and find ways to apply it to what you want to do. And then I will talk a little bit about arts and accessibility, what is disability, what is accessibility. We're going to look at some definitions. There might be some colorful slides, and we'll have fun doing that. And then we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like in an arts and cultural environment. And I do want to leave a generous space at the end there to make sure that we have time for your questions, your thoughts. I'm especially interested in hearing what does resonate, what feels like a breakthrough moment, or maybe even a moment that makes you pause and say, oh, I need to really rethink the way that we've been approaching this. And I want to problem solve with you. I want to celebrate with you. So those are the sorts of things that I want to leave space for at the end. So let's talk though about some meeting norms. So please keep your microphone off unless you're asked to unmute. We are hoping you could use the chat for questions along the way. I'll take a couple pauses along the way if there's anything that comes up along the way. You can have your video on if you'd like to do that, and also off is okay. I just want to name that. If being on camera is not something you want to do right now, that's totally fine. Use the chat and raise hand features for questions. So I just said you can put them in chat at any point, and then we'll have the open discussion at the end. CC button for captions, hide captions, view live transcript. I actually use the transcript typically when I participate in things. So there's just some meeting norms, and that is a buzz. So I'm type 1 diabetic, which I was going to tell you in a little bit. But I have some of these fun things attached to me, like this one. These collectively are my robot pancreas, is what I call them. So these things are going to be going off because I need to add some more insulin once I'm done with this. So if you hear those noises, that's what's going on. Meeting norms, that's another one. So you can use the rename feature to add your pronouns to your name if you desire. If you desire, also just know this is going to be a safe space to ask questions, make mistakes, learn. I love the policy that will turn off the recording if you have questions, which is awesome. So feel free to make this the kind of space that you can really learn in. And for me, that includes making mistakes. So don't feel like anything is a not good question. The not good question is the one you don't ask, as our kindergarten teacher said. And then take care of others by taking care of yourself. So please take breaks, step away. If you miss something, we can catch up later. Having the recording is really nice for that. So we'll take maybe a little break at one point just so I can like pet my cat a little bit, which is an important break for me. And I'm going to take a look to do that about like 4:25-ish. So with that, let's move on to the real content that you came for. So I like to kick off by talking about the language of disability. I think it's just such a foundational thing. There's a poet that is in Minneapolis named Kino Ebal who once said to me, and he's a poet, so just like everything that comes out of his mouth, I'm like, I'm sorry, we're like literally in the drive-through at Wendy's after a show, and you're like telling me this really profound thing, right? So he says, words make worlds. Words make worlds. And that really resonated with me because it does. The way that we conceive of words is how we also sometimes conceive of the world. So language is really important. And it's really challenging, especially around disability. I've been doing this for quite some time now, and I still use the wrong language sometimes. I'm still learning, things are still evolving. So again, in that world of making mistakes, making this a learning space, it's okay to make mistakes on these things, but it's good to start learning about some best practices. So first, person first language. So this is an approach about how you speak about people with disabilities using the person first. So you might think about, so the example here is person with a disability or disabilities, or people with disability or disabilities. So really centering that person first, saying, I'm a person first, and disability happens to be a part of what I experience in the world. The next is disability as identity. So that's disabled person, deaf person. Notice there's a capital D there with deaf. Similarly, capital A with autistic person. So this is a different approach that's gained a lot of traction basically since the 90s, and is really, I think, the preferred way of that I hear folks talk about themselves, to say that I'm a disabled person. It's not just that I'm a person who happens to have a disability, as if that's something so so tangential to the daily lived experience that they have. So really to say, and I say this as a disabled person myself, a person who now identifies as disabled and used to identify as a person with disabilities, that having a disability is a huge part of what happens in my day-to-day experience, and also how I sort of conceive of the world. So I think about it as core to my identity, and that's why I put it first. Deaf folks, so deaf person, capital D deaf, refers to ways a lot of people who especially grow up deaf think about what having a separate culture that is practiced through American Sign Language, for example. So capital D deaf is like capital A American. Just thinking about that as an identity with a shared sense of culture that comes behind it. Similarly, autistic person. So folks will often hear, someone on the autism spectrum, someone with autism spectrum disorder, which is a less preferred way of talking about it. Somebody who's autistic might say, I am disabled in that I have a brain that looks different and acts different and feels different than the typical brain, or what we're taught as the typical brain. But there's nothing wrong with me about it. It's just like how I am. So that's why you might see capital A autistic person rather than a person on the autism spectrum. So those are all examples of disability as identity. I want to note that there are still anachronisms in place that we encounter on the daily. So special needs, quote unquote, I'm using scare quotes here, um, is an example of so preferred language, especially in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, as it came to educational programming. And whether it's in schools or outside of schools. And it became a nice way to, the Special Olympics, another great example. We're moving away from doing that. There's actually some research done saying that the use of special made people sort of uh, think that people with disabilities are asking for something extra, when really it's asking for the same baseline. So we're moving away from things like that, but you might still hear and see special needs a lot. Handicap parking is probably the one that you see the most often. I actually have seen most signs move away from using the word handicapped. In general, if you encounter the word handicapped, if you find an old brochure, old sign, whatever, you can generally replace the word handicapped with accessible, and it'll work the same way. And people will understand it the same way. All right, so I've been talking for a while. You're like, who is this? Well, this is me. Moi. So I am a queer and disabled artist and cultural producer, meaning I like to create environments where creative folks can do their best work. So I've been a nonprofit staffer in nonprofits and also nonprofit adjacent enterprises like fiscally sponsored groups for 15 plus years. Am I in my 17th year? Wow, that happened quick. And also took forever, right? So I worked in lots of different organizations, various sizes, from tiny fiscally sponsored groups doing opera and community gardens with a picnic tasting menu. That was a real thing. And I was in charge of access programs for that. We had an ASL interpreter literally on a ladder. So that they could be seen in a garden. Wild. I told you there's going to be some weird, my particularly odd arts careers. You'll hear a little bit about that. Ladder ASL. Would not recommend, by the way. And I've also worked for large museums, the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, our premier modern art museum. I ran a big program where we called Open Field, where we invited the public to do stuff in our big backyard. So I also did lots of stuff there and with other museums. I've been around the place a lot. I'm also an independent consultant. I am a millennial, so I've had a side hustle. I don't know if anybody else is in that boat. But I've really loved doing especially the accessibility work. So as I moved around different organizations, I was like running a neighborhood organization for a while. Um, Actually, I mowed lawns for a while because that's what the artist life is like. But I printed up business cards that said consultant, and people started hiring me. And it's because I just won't shut my yap about arts and accessibility in particular. So, in addition to my regular job, I'm frequently doing, well, things like this, where I get to talk about accessibility and help folks do that work even better. Um, my day job, my passionate job is as accessibility program director at the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, which I've been there since 2019. And that is a regional funding organization. So we get money from the state legislature in Minnesota and pass it down to the region that we serve, which is the Twin Cities Metro, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and the 7 counties that surround those two cities. Really dense community in Minnesota, and so many interesting things going on. And it's my job to help people access all those public arts dollars that Minnesotans said it was important to support artists with an extra small percentage of sales tax, and end up being a fair chunk of change that I have the honor, privilege, real joy in helping folks access that money. So anyway, that's me. Uh, I'd love to hear a little bit about where you're at. I can't actually see you, so I'm a little bit I'm just sort of like talking to me and my cat who's over here. But how many folks do we have in the room? I think we have three. Is that what I'm reading? Well, I
Yes,
would
that's
love to hear
correct.
from
It's three.
anybody who'd like to about where are you based, what's your art practice or role in the arts, and if you have any connection to disability. I will say that it is not necessary for you to tell us about your connection to disability. It's vulnerable to do that. It can sometimes be um, there can be real consequences attached to it. So don't feel like you have to, but if you feel comfortable doing so, and of course we can turn off the recording too if that's of interest. Let's see if I can pull up the thing here.
There are
Ooh,
no hands raised.
no hands raised. Okay, that's cool. We can move along. I'm gonna pull up my notes again. See where did I stop off? Right. So my relationship to my work in arts accessibility is intertwined with my own personal experience with disability. I'll go back to um, my previous one with my pretty picture there with a headshot by Tristan McGovern. He's an amazing disabled photographer. Does a lot of work. Beautiful work. Anyway, so my own personal experience of disability has really uh, led to the kind of work that I'm doing now. I don't always share about what my disabilities are, like the specifics of them, and really no one owes you any information about their disability in general. But this is a moment where I will be radically open about it because I'm here to be vulnerable and to share what I know, and this is a big contextual part of that. So get ready for my list. So I am, in general, I call myself multiply chronically ill, or that I have multiple chronic illnesses that in isolation might not fully disable me, but like together are definitely enough to make things pretty challenging. I'm what's called a brittle type 1 diabetic. So I'm insulin dependent. I have to test my blood sugar constantly. I have to wear my robot pancreas. um, and the brittle part is that for whatever reason, mostly due to like nerve death in my digestion, I have a particularly hard time controlling my blood sugars. So, for example, blood sugar was going low right as I was logging on to this. It's a thing I'm sort of used to at this point. So I had a little nibble of something, could move on. But it's an example of the kind of thing that I'm handling at any given moment. I also have autoimmune arthritis. So I, at one point, got like the flu or something, and my body was like, you know what we should do is start destroying his joints. And it's very much under control thanks to medication now. Taken many years. There was a point at which I couldn't walk a full city block. My grip strength in my hands is pretty bad, so I have a lot of trouble cleaning, which I'm like, oh no, I can't clean. Um, but so that's the other sort of big thing attached. Actually, really, the biggest big thing is this big old bucket of mental health issues that I've had since I was a kid. So depression, anxiety, lots of other fun, big old bucket that I'm carrying around at any given moment. And actually, my mental health was definitely my first disability growing up. I had what's called a 504 plan in school. And those who haven't had to encounter that, that's a specific plan to help a student who has a disability access their right to public education. So for me to be able to access public education, I had to have some accommodations done so that I was able to participate in school because my mental health was so bad. So, uh, and then my most recent one is that I got COVID, and then I have been diagnosed with long COVID, and doing better-ish with things, but my brain's definitely different than it was before. This is an experience that I've heard from a lot of folks. So I have fatigue, reduced cognitive endurance, some symptoms that are common to ADHD that I didn't have quite as badly before. So navigating what I call my new brain has been a part of my experience. All of these are invisible disabilities, and that's a term that folks use a lot. Uh, it's a term basically for anything that isn't as obvious as disability that might include somebody using a wheelchair or a cane, mobility devices, those are called. Something that might cause a physical difference in a body. This is like a limb at difference. So mine, I look fine. I mean, and I do. I put on this fresh shirt not 10 minutes ago. Um, but I actually think this is one of my things. I kind of want to make like a bumper sticker about it. When people say invisible disability, I'm like, is it really invisible? Mine personally are visible if you're really paying attention, if you know what to look for. So I'm sweating a little bit. That's from my low blood sugar. Um, you probably wouldn't know that because you're like, maybe he's just a sweaty guy. And you know what? Sometimes I am just a sweaty guy, but sometimes, for especially for those who know me really well, like my family, they'll be like, "That's a low blood sugar sweat, isn't it?" So, paying attention to folks around you, seeing difference, but seeing it as a way to access their inner life or a way to help them or understand them. I mean, I think that's kind of what I'm saying about invisible disabilities. Is a way of thinking about it that I want to encourage you to think more about. There is not a single day in this life of mine where I don't curse some of the situations that I'm in, thanks to all these disabilities. But all of these experiences that I've had related to it have also taught me so much about myself. Um, they taught me a lot about the world, about how I want to show up in the world, and I really would not trade that for anything. Um, So meeting other disabled folks has really made me see how I'm part of a heritage, that the experiences I have are not new. In broad stroke, there are no new stories. Somebody has faced a challenge before. It may not be specific. It's definitely not specifically your context, but it's somebody who can maybe have something to share about how they got through it, how they're finding some strength, and maybe even not necessarily overcoming challenges. Maybe it's just like as somebody who like lives with this disorder, I get to see the world this way. I think some of the ways that I am a hammy public speaker is because of my anxiety. Actually, it means that I proactively seek out opportunities to test myself. That I like to entertain people as a way to deal with my anxiety, and like that's part of me, and that's an exciting part, and that feels like a gift in a lot of ways. So I invite you to think about that. All the ways that disability can teach us to be more human is sort of the invitation. Maybe that resonates with some of you. So my career has definitely been about finding spaces, building experiences, clearing away the rest of the world is kind of what I talk about, for the arts to create a new world, nurture belonging, or as Kino Eval said, to make new worlds. So that's what I'm here for. So with that, let's talk about defining disability. Like, what even is disability? We already learned about you. Here we go. Defining disability. So there are lots of, oh, you know what? We're at our break moment. Let's break it. Let's take a little moment. I'm going to go off camera for a second. Just, all right, I'm back. Just a little break. I hope you stretched. I hope you pet your cat. I had a little bit of my Diet Coke, which is one of my favorite things in the world. I'll probably be buried with a couple cases. I was going to say with one can, but that won't be enough. I will have a couple cases with me into the afterlife in my Viking funeral. All right, so what even is disability? Some of these things are really complicated. I'm going to make them a little bit simpler, and it's complicated the way that I make them simpler. All that to say, like this is the beginning of a way to think about it. It is there's so much nuance. So defining disability, uh, looking up at the bigger picture here to reinforce a couple things. One, we all belong on the spectrum of human difference. We all belong on a spectrum of human difference. Second thing is that disability is a social condition. meaning that the way that the world disables us is is different. Is what am I saying here? The world is built inaccessibly because we don't imagine that people with disabilities exist. That's kind of what culture teaches us. Of course, we know that's not true. And of course, we would never think that. But culture teaches us every day that people with disabilities don't exist and are to be ignored. And so that's something we all kind of inherit. And I already talked about how disability is an identity. So thinking about disability as a way to access a heritage and a way of thinking is another way I sort of want to just put down as a base layer. So there's a U.S. legal definition of disability that's related to civil rights. So your civil rights as somebody who's disabled to engage with the world. This is defined as a physical or mental impairment or a history of an impairment, or if you are perceived by others to have an impairment. So if you actually have a physical or mental impairment, if you have a history, so it's often like somebody who has a history of particular illness might face discrimination in the workplace, saying, well, we think you might get the same illness again, so we're not going to hire you. That's an example of discrimination related to disability. And then even being perceived by others. So if somebody is having challenges speaking, that person might not think of themselves as having a disability, but if somebody else says, well, I can't help you right now because I can't understand what you're saying, and I'm not even going to try, that would be an example of somebody who would be maybe, even though they don't believe themselves to be disabled, they might be perceived by others. That is also a way that disability gets defined under a civil rights framework. There's also Social Security. So these are determinations, very complicated, sometimes takes years. People are frequently told no. And access to Social Security, which is to life-saving cash benefits and other benefits that enable folks to not live in abject poverty. So they use a term called actual disability, which is your ability with its an actual disability's effect on your ability to generate income, or it's also known as sort of like a cost to society. These, the effect of generating income is actually used, but cost to society, I put in scare quotes here, just as a way to say like this is one of those things that we inherit, one of those ways of thinking about people with disabilities that we bring to every day, and we have to fight against in ourselves, even if we don't think that we've got it in ourselves right now. I also want to show just a couple sort of contemporary ways. Like I said, we've got special needs as a phrase. It's, was like useful for a time. And I think it was like, it really did bring us forward in a way. Now we have something called the social model, which is where we say it's not, as sort of what I was saying earlier, like disability is a social condition, which is to say that it's not that me as a person with disability that I'm the problem, it's that society is the problem. In that society hasn't figured out a way to fully include me in getting the things that I need to survive. Related to that is the identity model. So that's I think I was kind of saying this earlier that like disability can be a community with a heritage. So not just society is the problem, but like I'm here to solve some problems. And I've got a community of people around me to help me do that. So an identity model says that disability is access to a community with a heritage. So this title, the title of this slide is Making Space for Difference. I just wanted to note that not all people who experience disability identify as disabled. Many consider what others might call a disability to just be belonging on a spectrum of difference and not automatically an impairment. So I have just a list here of different ways that there might be differences that might manifest as disabilities. So those categories are sensory, so something like somebody who's blind would be considered having like a sensory disability. Mobility, flexibility, body structure is the second category. That might be somebody who only has one arm, for example, rather than two, as is typical. Cognitive, so that might be somebody who's got Down syndrome or other developmental intellectual disabilities. That means that their brains work differently than what we're told is the typical brain experience. Communication, if somebody had aphasia, so an inability to speak, that's actually a temporary thing that I had with long COVID, was that I was having a lot of trouble speaking just because my brain was so foggy. I just couldn't find, I just kept not being able to find a word. So temporarily, I had a communication disability. And I love to talk, so like that was terrible, and we're all benefiting now from me talking at you. Hopefully, I think the people who like were not jamming with me probably left already, or turned off the YouTube video, or they're making their kids watch it as punishment. In which case, hi kids. Um, I hope that was funny. And then finally, psychological, psychiatric. So again, big old bucket of mental health issues considered disabilities. So defining accessibility. So that was defining disability. It's define accessibility. I'm like, well, accessibility, that's like really obvious. And then I had to write an article about accessibility, and I was like, wait, what? How do I actually, how do I actually describe that? I actually couldn't kind of come up with it right away, not easily. So I came up with this that accessibility, or this is drawn from lots of sources. This is not brilliant, Scott. This is Scott pulling stuff together. So accessibility could be defined as affording the same opportunity or being afforded the same opportunity as someone without a disability. That's one thing. Same opportunity as someone without a disability. I've highlighted the word opportunity there. Second is that an accessible environment would integrate the experiences of people with and without disabilities. So let's say like entering a building, the same opportunity to get into the building might exist if there's a front door with stairs and a back door with a ramp. But the reality is this is two separate entrances. It's not an integrated experience, so it's not truly accessible. This last one, I put 4 question marks just to make it clear that like this is something kind of up for debate, and I'd love for you to think about. A state of accessibility might be one in which someone experiences the same outcomes as someone without a disability. So the same outcomes as someone without a disability. Is it an accessible environment? Some would say that it's an accessible environment. We all have the same opportunity to get there, have an opportunity, apply for a grant, um, and that might be enough to be accessible. I want to push us to be thinking about if we're not getting the same outcomes, if there's a job that people are applying for, and again, people disproportionately from disability community are not getting that job, that means that the outcomes are different. Does that mean that it's not an accessible opportunity? Or does it mean that, or is that not something you'd consider accessible? So I'd think about that. So defining ableism. So we talked about what is disability, what is accessibility. Now I want to talk a little bit about defining ableism. So ableism, and get ready. This was like, again, these are all things I was like, I know what that means. And then I was like, wait, when you really think about it, it's like, this is some deep, like Shakespeare, John Donne poetry here. If you really think deeply about language, words make worlds, as Kino tells us. So, defining ableism. So, ableism is a conceptual system that devalues people with disabilities. Conceptual system that devalues people with disabilities. And that results in attitudes that can become stereotypes and behaviors that can become discrimination. So when you have a regular attitude about things, it can become a stereotype and become embedded in culture. When there are little minute behaviors that comes together over time to sort of snowball, that can become discrimination both on an interpersonal level and on a systemic level. So ableism delineates the breadth of human difference into false binaries. So what is normal versus what is not normal? What is valuable versus what is not valuable? And I want to just sort of say those again with not what is valuable, but who is valuable versus who is not valuable. These are all deep, ableism in particular is deeply rooted in other forms of prejudice, especially racism. But I will say that every kind of prejudice is also deeply rooted in ableism. So here's a critical, key, super duper important point. which is that the greatest barriers for people with disabilities are, this is like a game, this is my game show moment, attitudes and behaviors. That was that first thing I said, attitudes and behaviors that become stereotypes and discrimination. So the greatest barriers for people with disabilities are attitudes and behaviors. Thankfully, and specifically those that uphold ableism, obviously, like great attitudes and great behaviors. Those are maybe the best tools actually for combating when they're barriers. I haven't thought of that before. That just came out of me right now, and I might add that to my stuff in the future. So thankfully, attitudes and behaviors are cheaper to retrofit than an elevator. That's going on my bumper sticker too. So remember these meeting norms that we started at the top. Keep the microphone off. These are all examples of things that I like fully free for me to say them, to decide that this is the kind of environment that I want. I want this environment to be accessible in ways that I know work for me specifically, and also hopefully work for other people who are around. And I've cultivated an understanding of some of these things to say, like, commonly, this is an issue that many folks with disabilities experience. Here's an easy way to fix it. So these meeting norms that we already have, keep the microphone off. That's to reduce distractions, and not just for you, but for me too, because I can get pulled away. Let me tell you, if Kitty Pants weren't asleep and bothered by me, that's my cat's name is Kitty Pants. She's adorable. She's a rare female orange tabby. Petting her, she's really upset with me. But if she wants to come up and start talking, which she often does, that's distracting, and maybe for other people too. So keeping the microphone off is helpful for that. Using the chat, raise hand for questions, which of course they forgot to stop. But that's helpful for folks with processing differences or communications preferences. Maybe talking out loud is like not your jam, which is totally cool. Having the option to chat helps with that. Similarly, like I process well by writing. And so writing out my questions in the chat is really helpful for me. Some folks are like, I can't be bothered to write, and I'm going to raise my hand and just ask the question. That's awesome. Having both of those options is an example of accessibility. It's also an example of universal design, which is the concept that we build environments that are the most accessible to the most people is universal design. So the CC button or live transcript, that is an example of an access service, which we're pretty familiar with at this point, but that's a free one already built into this system, and knowing how to, that it's there and giving a little help on how to access it, that's an example of how you make an access service free for folks to enjoy. Video off okay, take breaks, step away, we can catch up. That's undoing some norms that some folks might have around meetings that are sometimes ableist. Not always, there are good reasons to have your camera on often. I know that I benefit by reading people's facial expressions and kind of getting body language that helps me understand the full context of what they're saying and why they're saying it. But sometimes enforcing that those are on, those can be ableist. And then being that safe space to ask questions, make mistakes, learn. I included that because I think it's important to name intentions and goals explicitly. Perfection is not the goal, for me anyway. Is it something I struggle with constantly? Because perfectionism is something I really hold on to that may be related to my anxiety and also my depression, but also, you know, is part of the totally fine, but maybe not typical brained person's approach to the world perfection. That I kind of got lost in my own words right there. That's an example of me making mistakes and learning from it. So maybe I won't do that again. But naming intentions, goals, that's the, you know, saying like, we're here to do this right now. Actually naming stuff like that is a huge access strategy. Just so there's like less ambiguity. Being without ambiguity is really helpful for me. I know it is for other people. It's something we can do really easily. Okay, categories of access. We're rounding the bend here, people. I think I actually timed this pretty well. It's exciting. So categories of access. So there are lots of ways to think about access. I just named some of the ones that were really about attitudes and behaviors, things that didn't have something tangible attached to it necessarily. So tangible things are what we often think about for accessibility, physical aspects, but those are really only part of the work. So when you're doing work to say, like, how do I become more accessible? You might do something that's called a physical audit, and that means going around and really thinking through the lens of if I were using a wheelchair, would I be able to get through this door? If not, I should note that and come up with a plan on how to address that in the future. Um, so a physical audit is just one part of the accessible auditing process. A thorough review, a way of thinking about the kind of work that you're doing and how you want to engage people and welcome people to it. So a comprehensive audit will consider how people learn about, engage with, and benefit from your goods and services. So how people learn about, engage with, and benefit from your goods and services. An audit should consider the ways that people with various kinds of disabilities may encounter barriers to engagement. And also thinking about all the ways that people might prefer a different way of engaging with your work. So in this slide, there is a collection of accessibility accommodations icons in blue and white that are arranged in a square. And I have these categories of access, which is something at one point I needed to sort of like conceptually figure out what I was doing. I'm all self-taught on this. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I was put in charge of access services at a small theater, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I really love to learn things. I'm a big nerd. I like teaching things back too. But I really dug deep and sort of developed my own conceptual frameworks about how to do this work, which is kind of why I'm doing this now. So I came up with these categories of access as a way for me to keep thinking about like, oh, have I thought about this category? Have I thought about this category? So accessibility policies. I'll just give you like an example of each of these. So accessibility policies, those meeting norms that we just did, it's an example of accessibility policies. They could be full-on ADA access plan, very formal, adopted by a board of directors, or it could be how you, as a person who conducts meetings, decides to conduct a meeting on the regular. That could be your own personal policy. That's a way you can get started and ask no one's permission. Access planning and resources, that might be where there might be something more like a formal ADA access plan, which is where you go through and audit various aspects of what you do and systematically say like, oh, we have this doorway that folks who use wheelchairs wouldn't be able to get through. Or we have a bathroom that doesn't have a large enough stall for somebody to move around in, or get assistance from somebody if they use somebody like a PCA to help them toilet. So those are example planning and resources. It can also go down to like just adding it as an agenda item. If you're doing like a theater production as like a small community theater, group of friends, being like, hey, we've like thought about this. That's planning and resources right there. It doesn't have to be fancy. This is like a big thing for me. Like, it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be the perfect thing. Scott. All right, physical and architectural access. Those are the things we typically think of, ramps, etc., elevators, communications and outreach. So those are the ways that people can connect with us in the way that they prefer. So an example of that was sort of you can raise your hand to ask a question, or you can put it in the chat. That's an example of like some communications access. And then finally, accessible programs and services. That's like that CC button. So offering ways that folks can use professional skills or devices as a way that are created specifically for people with disabilities who have different ways of accessing the world to enable them to do that. Those categories of access. Like I said, I'm rounding the bend here. Getting started is the hardest step. This is where we transition to like, what are you going to do now? So here's some principles that I have. One, leadership is critical. Having people at all levels of the organization interested, invested, understanding not just the importance or like how nice it would be, but the real stakes of what it means to not consider the ways that that people might not be able to participate the way that they want to. So leadership, especially at the top, is helpful because that's the control of resources. But even at the bottom, like every interaction is a fractal image of your organization as a whole, or your effort as a whole. So thinking about leadership at every step is critical, including the ways that you have leadership. And then starting internally, that's really where I say an organization might start. It could be good to like offer something, we're going to offer ASL interpretation. But if you're not really starting, if you don't know where to start, think about like, are there ways that we might address access needs amongst us, the staff, right now? Like saying it's okay to turn off your camera for this meeting. That might be a nice internal step to take. third point here is embracing creativity and imperfection. Again, here's my imperfection thing. Scott, you got to remember it. It's because if I don't put it in here constantly and I don't tell myself these things, I won't. So embracing creativity and imperfection. So one of the reasons that I work in the arts is that I think that artists and the folks that support artists like me are engineers of empathy, and the work that we're doing is really, really important, like really, really important. And we bring a particular skill set around engaging creativity that I think is uniquely encouraged. And that is such an asset. It's the reason why I'm doing this work in this field right now. So embracing creativity, like I called this radically together, because I think it is radical to imagine not just that, like, again, culture tells us not to think these things. They tell us that we want to hide away people with disabilities. That literally happened for many, many years, putting folks in institutions or making it literally illegal for them to be on the street. Something called the ugly laws, if you want to look that up. All the ways that society teaches us to push away people with disabilities, like for us to imagine that there are people with disabilities who want to participate, that's actually kind of a radical act. It's sad that it's a radical act, but it is a radical act. Um, so thinking about radical acts as creative acts, thinking about not just that folks exist, but like the ways they might access work, like that can be a fun, creative problem solving thing. And that's sort of my encouragement for you, is to think about how we can be radically together. And then also thinking about imperfection. I have learned that it's really important to get good at apologizing. I'm pretty good at apologizing. Oh, sorry, was I like too much there? See, I did it right there. I'm just kidding. That was awful. Getting good at apologizing is one skill set that I think it's really important to have. Uh, because the more that you engage people who have a hard time typically engaging with your work, the more you're going to hear about all the ways you're doing it wrong. It's just like a reality. And I encourage you to think about getting complaints as a sign that you're doing it right. Last couple slides here. Getting started is still the hardest step. Access thinking. So these are a couple frameworks to think about how you do this work. Access thinking. So that is considering the fullness of human abilities and disabilities in everyday choices. Fullness of human abilities and disabilities in everyday choices. So thinking about, oh, we can't get a wheelchair through that door. So now I'm like, oh, I guess I hadn't really thought about that before, but now I'm practiced in access thinking. I'm like, oh, now I can see that. So that's a way that you start making choices about how to do things differently. Like, well, we do have this other entrance, and it kind of sucks that it's not the same entrance, but like that's a way to get folks in. That's access thinking, and that happens sort of on the individual level. So a culture of access then is practicing access thinking together. And it's important to do this work like you would with any organizational culture to make it a constant practice, make it a habit, make it something that you always have on an agenda at some regular cycle. That's how you create a culture of access. And then finally, I encourage you especially to cultivate a community of access. There's that phrase, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. This community of people right here, and I'm sure everyone attached to this organization are going to find that this work happens in the long run because we help each other. We hold on to each other. We vent to each other. I've been doing this a long time comparatively to lots of folks who go into it. Accessibility, disability work is really, it's burnout work. And the only way that I have kept going is by building community. And so I encourage you, starting right now, to do that. I have a section, final Q&A here. You got about 10 minutes left. Any point about clarifying what I presented, challenges you're facing, and I think we'll probably turn off the camera for this. But if you have any ideas or challenges, I'm happy to sort of brainstorm with you and think about pointing you to pointers and resources. Again, my name is Scott Artley. You can find out more information about me at scottartley.com. That's Scott, S-C-O-T-T, last name A-R-T, Art, Ley.com. I do consulting, training, and public speaking for creative community access. All materials were copyright 2023 when I made some of them, and they're also copyright 2024 because I'm saying this right now. It's a real pleasure to get like truly, it's such an honor to be able to like sit here and be such a ham talking about something I care about so much. So thank you for being with me as I do that. It takes a lot of energy to set aside time and do anything these days. And so it really means a lot that you took a moment to be here or to watch this and use that commitment paid forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Let me turn my camera on. And I want to say before we turn the camera, well, turn the recording off so that if there are any questions, I want to say they're in the chat. There was thank you very much for this session. It was really helpful to see how the concept of disability and accessibility has evolved. We have not reached the finish line, but we are expanding how we see each other and connect with each other. So thank you. And
So well put.
yes. And then for myself, I want to also thank you again for your time and your expertise. And we appreciate the tips that you've given to increase our access thinking. I've learned some new words for cultivating a culture of access in the arts, in our arts organizations, and in our communities. And it's something that we can take forward with us. So thank you so much. And we're going to turn the camera off and the recording off. So if there are any questions, and we will have our next session the second Thursday in July. So I look forward to any of you attending then as well. So thank you so much.